jump right in. 1 second, let me just get everything up. Okay, so let's call this meeting to order at 5:05. The first item on the agenda is the agenda. May I please have a motion on the agenda?
I'd move to adopt the agenda.
Councillor Schomburg moves it, seconded by Councillor Paul. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That carries, and we have an agenda. So that brings us into the, going to go look at the public forum sheet again, not seeing anyone as having signed up at this point. Again, folks, if you are wanting to comment on particular items, I'll also stop after an explanation is given, and you can use the raise hand function. I do see a couple folks there. If you are interested in speaking, you can use the raise hand function. Or again, use that public forum sign up sheet. I'll be checking both of those. So just let me know, but the raise hand function is probably the easiest. And again, I'll stop after each item that we have this evening. So with that, let's jump right into our first item, which is the school budget item. And we have Nathan Lavery from the district with us to share some information about the school budget. So I will turn it over to Nathan and have you just share some information about what folks are going to be voting on.
Great. Thank you, President Tracy. So I will briefly share my screen here and remind folks that the presentation you're seeing tonight is on the city's board docs page. And if you have additional, if you're looking for additional school budget information, you can visit www.bsdvt.org, the school district's website. And under the budget tab there, we have extensive budget information. Very briefly, there is a ballot question, as there is every year, to adopt the school budget. And I'm going to provide a few quick highlights by scrolling through this presentation. One of the things that the budget incorporates is a significant number of operational reductions, items that are not anticipated to have any programmatic impact on student learning, but are ways that we could reduce costs to taxpayers. We also made a few modest increases to the budget, including adding some money to support communications with our multilingual families, and also some money to support implementation of our new strategic plan in the coming year. We further identified with our principals and directors opportunities to create savings associated with eliminating vacant positions and other budget reductions. All of this done, as you'll see on the next screen here, in order to control the rate of growth in the school budget. And the major cost driver, in addition to kind of regular growth, which is in the baseline number that happens every year, is the relocation of students into the downtown BHS location and to other various sites for our tech center. Those relocations made necessary by the presence of PCBs on the Burlington High School campus on Institute Road. So knowing that those costs were present, we made a lot of efforts to reduce spending in areas that we could control, and we sought support from the state for some of the costs of moving into downtown BHS. That support has passed the legislature, and we're just waiting on final action from the governor. So that will further reduce costs to the tune of $720,000 in the first year. The net result of all this is a budget of $95.1 million. That's the figure that appears on the ballot. And one other thing that's important to note about that budget is it includes application of over $4 million of surplus funds. Those are reserves the district had largely from savings associated with closing down through the middle of last school year, and roughly this time, almost in March last school year due to COVID. So we had substantial savings associated with that. We're able to put that back toward our budget next year, again, reducing the tax impact. There are estimated tax impacts in our presentation and associated with this budget, including a 6.88% increase in property tax rates. And we've translated that into what the budget would look like for a hypothetical property taxpayer and a hypothetical payer of education taxes who pays based on income. One of the most encouraging recent signs out of the legislature is that we are likely to actually experience a lower property tax impact than these estimates project, because the state's education fund, that is the way that the state funds education, has shown much more robust revenue estimates recently. That is to say that there's more money likely coming into that fund to support schools, meaning that there's a lower burden on taxpayers. So we're optimistic that our tax rate increase estimates here are on the high end of what is likely. But as usual, those numbers are not finalized until the legislative session ends. So that's the school budget in a nutshell. This presentation does contain the ballot language, which will appear on the ballot and references the $95 million budget, and also reflects the fact that on a per pupil, equalized pupil basis, our spending is actually growing by less than 1%. So that is our presentation for tonight.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Are there any questions on this item? I see we have 4 people as attendees. Not seeing anybody who is, you can use the raise hand function, which if you go to the, you should be able to use that function. Anybody who's interested in commenting can identify you. Still not seeing anybody as having signed up in the public comment section. Going once, twice. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Nathan, for your explanation there. Very much appreciate it. And we will, and if, is there contact information if folks have questions or other things that they can ask for the district, for clarification from the district?
Certainly, if
town meeting day?
If there's any questions that folks have between now and town meeting day, they should use the email address superintendent@bsdvt.org for any of those questions, and we'll respond as quickly as we can.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing that information with us, and we'll look forward to seeing the results on town meeting day.
Great. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you. You as well. All right. So we have, next we have item number 2, which is a question regarding adding members to the Board of Airport Commissioners. And we have Councillor Paul with us this evening. So Councillor Paul, are you able to just provide a summary of what this ballot item is about since you've been involved with it? You're muted right now.
I don't know why I can't get the hang of that. Thank you so much. Sorry about that. It's actually item number 3. 1 was the agenda, so we're up to 3.
Okay, yeah.
We're just whizzing along. So this is a proposed charter change to add members to the Board of Airport Commissioners. There's currently 5 seats on the commission. 4 are for the city of Burlington, that are appointed by the City Council with the mayor presiding. So there's 13 votes. And 1 is appointed by South Burlington. It's a seat for the city of South Burlington, and it's appointed by the South Burlington City Council. So just in a nutshell, this charter change has been a long time in the making. It began when Burlington undertook a strategic plan to develop a strategic plan for the airport several years ago. And one of the points that was raised in that plan was governance and Winooski's longstanding desire to have representation, formal voice at the table on the airport commission. Since that time, and particularly over the last 2 years, the 3 cities, Winooski, Burlington, and South Burlington, under the leadership of Mayor Weinberger, Mayor Lott of Winooski, and Council Chair Helen Reilly, have begun, actively working, collaborating on the common goals and priorities that we all have for the airport, for serving the needs of those most impacted by the airport, notably noise mitigation and addressing this next phase of noise mitigation for those directly impacted. This resulted in an MOU, and in the MOU, there's a number of commitments that each city has. One of the commitments for Burlington was that we would ask for the approval by the voters for a seat for the city of Winooski at the earliest possible city election. And the MOU was just signed a little over a month ago, and here we are at the first earliest date to ask the voters. It is a charter change. And I just would, just so that people understand, this would add a seat for Winooski, but also add a seat for Burlington. And what that does is that while it adds a seat for Winooski, it would also maintain an odd number of commissioners, which is something that we strive to do on all city commissions and boards. And it would maintain the balance of one from Winooski, one from South Burlington, and then the remaining members of the commission from the city of Burlington. That's the charter change.
Great, thank you for that explanation. I'm still not seeing anyone as having signed up in the using that public forum side. We also have as an option the raise hand function. So if anybody has a question or a comment on this particular item, please feel free to use the raise hand function in Zoom. If you are interested in speaking to items, okay, going once, twice, okay. We will move on. Thank you, Councillor Paul, for that explanation.
Thanks very much.
Yep, we're going to move on to our next item, which is the proposed charter change to regulate thermal energy systems. So, Councillor Hanson, can I ask you to please provide an explanation of what this item is?
Sure, yeah, happy to. Thanks, President Tracy, and good to see you all again, second night in a row. So this item is sort of broad authorizing language that would give the city the ability to create policies to regulate thermal energy systems in buildings, both new and existing buildings, commercial and residential. Including the ability to assess a carbon impact fee. However, with that particular type of policy, it could not be enacted unless a specific proposal were to be approved by the voters. So any sort of carbon impact fee would have to go before the voters of Burlington at a citywide election before being enacted. Other policies to regulate thermal energy could be created under this charter change. So that's kind of the quick summary, and this doesn't prescribe any particular policy. It just authorizes the city to create policy within this domain.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that explanation. Are there any members of the public who are interested in speaking to this particular item? You can certainly use the raise hand function in Zoom. Not seeing any folks as having signed up.
And I should add, President Tracy, I left out one key component of it, is that the policies in this area would specifically be for the purposes of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the city. So it's not just, we can't just do any policy related to thermal energy systems. It's policy specific to reducing emissions.
Okay, thank you very much. Still not seeing anyone as having raised their hand. Is there anybody who's interested in speaking? You can indicate by using the raise hand function. Okay, I'm still not seeing anyone who's signed up in the public forum document either. So we will move on. Thank you for that explanation, Councillor Hanson. The next item I believe we're also asking you to explain, which is item number 5, proposed charter change to adopt ranked choice voting for city councillors. Are you able to please also provide an explanation of what this ballot item concerns, Councillor Hanson?
Sure, yeah. So this ballot item would change the way that we conduct elections for city council elections in Burlington. It would change the voting system from the current system where you select one candidate and there's a 40% threshold. And if a candidate achieves 40% of the vote, they are elected. If no candidate receives 40% of the vote, there's a runoff between the top two vote getters, a separate runoff election. This would shift from that system to an instant runoff voting, ranked choice voting system in which you would be able to rank in order of preference up to the number of candidates running. So if there's 5 candidates running, you could rank up to 1 through 5 or any amount less than that. So you rank your candidates in order of preference, and then if a candidate in the first round receives greater than 50% of the vote, that candidate is elected. If no candidate receives 50% of those first choice preferences, there's an instant runoff that's conducted, whereby the bottom vote getting candidate is eliminated, and everyone who voted for that candidate, their vote instead moves towards their second choice candidate, and so on and so forth until a candidate does actually surpass 50% of the vote. So it's different from our current system sort of in 2 ways. One is the threshold, or 3 ways, I guess. One is the ability for voters to rank. 2 is the threshold of victory, changing from 40% to 50%. And then the third change is that instead of a separate runoff election, in the case of a runoff, there's an immediate runoff that takes place and is calculated under this system. So those are sort of the 3 main changes that would come into effect if this charter change were approved.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you for that explanation. Again, if folks are interested in commenting or asking a question about this system, please use the raise hand function. I'm still not seeing anyone in the public information hearing. Again, if you are interested in signing up for that, you can do so by going to burlingtonvt.gov/citycouncil/public-forum. Again, you're certainly welcome to use the raise hand function as well, and I'll unmute your mics. Okay, still not seeing anyone. Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to the next item, and I'm going to go regarding just cause evictions. And for that, I will ask Councillor Pine to provide an explanation there.
Thank you, President Tracy. Question number 5 on the ballot is regarding essentially a charter change, asking the voters if the City Council should have the authority to amend laws that regulate the termination of tenancy, residential tenancy only, and as with all charter changes, would need to go before the state legislature. Essentially, what this proposal accomplishes or proposes to accomplish is that residential tenants would be that to terminate a tenancy, a property owner, rental property owner, would have to have a just cause, and just causes are to include but not be limited to a material breach of a written rental agreement by the tenant's violation of state statutes regulating the tenant's obligations in the rental agreements, non-payment of rent, and a tenant's failure or unwillingness to accept and sign a new lease with reasonable good faith renewal terms. The council decided to include some exemptions from this provision, and those exemptions are listed in the full wording of the question, but the ordinance would essentially exempt a number of property ownership scenarios and conditions that I will list. Sublets and in-unit rentals, as well as the following, but perhaps not limited to: owner-occupied duplexes and triplexes, units being withdrawn from the rental market, including properties to be occupied by the owner or an immediate family member as their primary residence, and those units in need of substantial renovation or rehabilitation. There is a provision that also mitigates the potential negative impacts on both tenants and property owners. That is to include adequate notice and reasonable relocation expenses, a reasonable probationary period after the initial occupancy before this protection or this law would go into effect, and to limit unreasonable rent increases that can be deemed essentially de facto evictions. Although this is not intended to limit rent increases broadly in the market, it is intended to only relate to those rent increases which are asserted to be for the purposes of removing a tenant. Lastly, the charter change essentially lays out that the ordinance will define what is reasonable and adequate notice in defining just cause, and require that landlords provide notice of just cause and other legal requirements as part of a lease.
Excellent. Okay. Appreciate that explanation. Are there any comments or questions from members of the public? Again, not seeing anybody having signed up in the sheet. You can also, okay, I see Chapel Sokol. I will unmute your mic. So go ahead. You should have speaking. There you go. Welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Great. Hi, thanks, Max. Thanks, Brian. There is a piece of this that says that if a property is being taken off the rental market, that then the landlord can evict the tenant, or that's a clause. Is that correct?
Just to clarify, that it is to terminate the tenancy, but it doesn't require eviction per se.
Oh, yeah. My words are bad.
Yep.
Are short-term rentals or Airbnbs, are those rentals? I mean, could a property owner take the property off the rental market but turn it into an Airbnb and use that to terminate a tenant?
I'm going to ask the city attorney to help me with this, because that is a policy issue, an arena that the city council is currently grappling with, and actually Councillor Hightower is involved in the ordinance committee. So there is a joint committee of our city council ordinance committee along with the entire planning commission that is looking very much at the issue of short-term rentals. So I'd have to ask maybe either Councillor Hightower or city attorney Blackwood to help respond to that question.
Okay, I see Attorney Blackwood. You've turned on your camera. Are you able to speak to it, Attorney Blackwood?
I can speak to it. I think we can't tell you the answer to that for two reasons. One, the short-term rental are in the process of the city's looking at that, because what you're raising is sort of a larger issue as to removal of housing from the rental market and putting it into short-term rental market. And the city is in the midst of grappling with that. So that will be determined elsewhere. And also, this is just a charter provision saying that an ordinance can be adopted. So there isn't yet an ordinance that is specifically being discussed or that has been drafted to go along with this. And between those two options, that's, I suspect, when that issue will get discussed.
Okay, so you anticipate that by the time the ordinance is actually implemented, the issues associated with short-term rentals will be reconciled. It'll all kind of come together.
I think that will be everybody's goal, to try to do that if there's a way to do it. So I'm not guaranteeing that someone's going to come up with any specific result.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful. Councillor Hightower, I saw you flipped on. Okay, I don't know if you had anything to add, Councillor, but
I think Eileen covered it well.
okay, wonderful. All right. Were there other members of the public wishing just to comment or ask a question on this item? You can use the raise hand function. Let's check this form again. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone on the form having signed up. Can certainly use the raise hand function. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and move us along to the next item, which is regarding opting in to retail cannabis sales. And for that, I'm going to go to Councillor Carpenter.
Thanks. As you all may have been following, the state legislature has been grappling for a number of years with the question of legalizing marijuana and cannabis products. This last fall, the state did pass a piece of legislation that does legalize cannabis products, including the sale of cannabis products. Under that legislation, which is being referred to as Act 164, the state has said specifically for the purposes of retail sales, i.e. shops, a community can choose to opt in or not to allow the retail sale of cannabis in their community. Almost all of the regulation under Act 64 is governed by the state, but there is this provision that if you, a community, want to allow the sale of retail cannabis products in your community, then you need to opt in. You need to affirmatively say, we will allow it. And that's what this ballot item does is, if you vote for it, it says we will allow the sale of retail cannabis in our community. If you vote against it, then we would not be allowing the sale of retail cannabis in our community. And as part of that, and the rationale for doing it now is this would not be implemented until October of 2022. The state has put out some timelines about when retail sales can begin in a community. The soonest that retail sales could begin in the state, if a community opts in, would be May of 22, depending on the type of license you have. Burlington made a decision that we wanted to have all the licensees under the state program start at the same time. And so that October of 22 is when the small growers are allowed. And so we've explicitly put that on our ballot. And then in between that time, if this is adopted, the city will develop a cannabis control board and will develop ordinances around those retail shops within the framework of what is allowed in the state law. There's a lot of governance and oversight by the state legislation. So the community is somewhat limited in what it can control other than to affirmatively say, we will allow it in our community.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that explanation, Councillor. Are there any members of the public wishing to ask a question or just comment on this item? You can use the raise hand function. Not seeing anyone who's signed up. Again, you can use the raise hand function in the Zoom to indicate that you'd like to comment, and I'll enable your microphone. Once, twice. Okay, thank you again, Councillor Carpenter. Let's move on to the final item for this evening, a question regarding an advisory question regarding climate justice in building decarbonization. I'm going to turn back to Councillor Hanson for an explanation of this question.
Great, thanks. So this question directly relates to ballot question 3, the charter change related to the regulation of thermal energy systems in buildings. And this is an advisory question that would give advice. I mean, advisory, I guess I'll use the word advice, from the voters to the city council to, in the event that the charter change passes and the council does have the authority to enact policies along these lines, this advises the council to enact policies in that realm that would benefit low and moderate income Burlingtonians and BIPOC Burlingtonians in the policy creation regarding thermal energy systems in buildings. So it directly relates to ballot question 3, the charter change, and the policies that could ultimately flow out of that charter change.
Okay, thank you for that explanation, Councillor. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak to this item? You can use the raise hand function. Not seeing anybody signed up in the form. Okay, going once, twice. All right, that completes our agenda for this evening. We appreciate all the explanations that were given to provide clarity for the voters. Now that we've done that, a motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Hanson. Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Carpenter. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned at 5:36. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it, and encourage everyone to get out and make sure that your votes are counted for town meeting day. Thanks so much.